Hello everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the major impacts of World War I. So a lot of times people talk about things happening during the war. Well, what do we see happens after the war as a consequence to it? And that may be social, political, and we might also look at the human costs as well that this war had. And so let's start out with the casualties. When you hear the word casualty, we're usually thinking about those who have died, those who are wounded, or possibly those who are missing or prisoners of war. And if you look at this chart, the numbers are staggering. Germany had 1.7 million dead, Russia 1.7 million dead, France 1.4 dead, Austria-Hungary 1.2 dead. We're down the list here at 126,000 dying, but wounded, the first three you have over 4 million each. Missing, 2.5 million missing men for Russia, which they probably have died. And so you add these numbers up and you get just staggering numbers of people that were a part of this war that were harmed in some way. Right here between these four countries, we have about 6 million men. Okay, another 2 million here, 8 million. So around 9 million men in these columns that have died from the war, not including the wounded, the missing in action, things like that. And so the people that died from this war, the numbers were horrific. And that's because of that trench warfare and how deadly it was. Warfare also has a big impact on other elements as well. For example, if you look at population, and if we look at our different countries, this is the United States, our population increases a little bit, but we also aren't involved in the war until the last year, and so that makes sense. But you look at other countries, Germany's in black here, and their population declines. These stay steady or they decline a little bit. And so you'd expect in this time period, population usually goes up. Well, it declines. Other things, GDP, the amount of goods and services produced per person. The United States rises because we're selling so many goods to Britain and France, but other countries don't do so well. France is in decline. Germany is in decline as well, and that'll become a major issue later on. Debt. This is a big one. So what percentage of the goods and services they make goes towards debt? So don't worry too much about the numbers, but look at what you see. And so red, Great Britain, goes into a lot of debt. The green, Italy, goes into a lot of debt. France goes into debt. Germany, it doesn't show us going into debt. And the reasoning behind that is because the government's changing. It's going to later on kind of collapse and other things. So Germany actually doesn't look like it goes into debt because it's not producing as many goods and other things, but they're hurting a lot. Inflation. So inflation is when the price of goods increases. And so in the United States, we have about 60%, and that's not good. Usually you want inflation to be around 2%. But other countries, prices double in France. You look at Germany, 300%. And so massive inflation, they're making things really expensive, so Germany's struggling. And then industrial production. We're creating more goods because we're not harmed by the war. But other countries like Germany and France and Britain, they're all producing less because of this war, and that really harmed their industrial production. And especially a country like France was so beaten up from the war that it's hard to come back from that. So a lot of countries struggled economically because of this war, to say the least. Now, politically, if you look at the boundaries, we have major changes here. Germany has to give up part of its territory over here. You can see on this side here, this part of the territory from Germany and from Russia is given up to make Poland and Lithuania and Romania. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is gone. And so now you have all these small countries that are a part of it. And so in terms of political, we're looking at all kinds of new countries that are created that did not exist before this war. And then there's the influenza, the Spanish flu. And this happens in 1918, and as the soldiers come home from war, a lot of them are bringing this flu with them. And because all these men are in the trenches in Europe together, when they come home from a war, they come home to everywhere, to the United States, to Australia, to Britain, to Africa, Asia, all these kind of places. And 20 to 50 million people are killed. Right now, as I record this, there's around 80,000 people that have been killed from the coronavirus. So the coronavirus is nothing compared to this in terms of the number of people it affects. And the reason for it, well, everybody's fighting, then everybody comes home. They go home to Africa, they go home to Asia, they go home to Australia and the United States, and they bring that plague with them. And the deaths, you can see here, these are typical deaths in pneumonia and influenza in the United States. You can see normally around 20,000 people or less die from it. And then you see 1919, the year all the soldiers come back, we have almost 200,000 people die from it. So a massive spike there. And that is because of these soldiers coming home and that disease spreading. And so you can see some of the biggest cities. Same as what we're seeing with the coronavirus, trying to keep people away from spreading germs and things like that. So there were spitting penalties, which is kind of funny. But yeah, you look at what they say here, percentage of the population that died. And some of these bigger cities you see are higher than others. Let's see here, do we have any local ones? Twin Cities area here. St. Paul, Minnesota, right here. So a little more locally, Minneapolis there, and Milwaukee as well. So it affected all the United States. You see some areas are bigger than others. These are kind of your hubs. A lot of the hubs on the edges got it first, where soldiers were coming in, and then moved inward, and places with bigger, darker circles are your areas where you have cities. And so we see a big human cost in that this pandemic follows home after the war. If everybody hadn't been there for the war, this probably wouldn't have spread, but because they were, this is what we see happen.